Right, let me bring you back together. First of all, really impressed. There seems to be a lot of energy still in the room, so well done for that. There was a real buzz in that conversation. So I suspect you have had highlights, which is good. Do any of you want to share your highlights? Anything that stood out? Anything you heard from the person you've spoken to that is a new highlight for you? Think about it, because now we have the chance to hear from each of the parallel session chairs what their highlights were. Just very briefly, we'll go through the different sessions, and then you will have heard all the highlights there were across the sessions. So shall we start with you, Malcolm? Just very briefly.
Right, so I was in the energy network storage and vectors, and I kind of felt like I was in a episode of Doctor Who, and I was in the TARDIS and the time travel, because it was really interesting. The first session was about what are we doing today, which is around Project Leo and what is the stuff that we're actually doing on the ground now, and then also some of the legal implications around that. The next session was looking at what is the near-term battery developments going to be looking like. So that was kind of like, okay, now we move 10 years ahead. What does that look like? And what does that will look like and what's coming down the line? That was really exciting to see what the battery technology is coming through is going to be. And then the last session was, in one sense, I was transported back to when I was an 18-year-old learning about ATP and all that type of stuff and the chemistry behind that. That was kind of fun. But more interestingly, it was pointing to what might be coming down the line in 20 to 30 years time, and with Chris talking about what happens when you go to a fully renewable system and what are the what are the storage requirements required in the UK. So I really felt like as we walked through the day, we were actually jumping, decades at a time. And for me, that was the most interesting aspect of this, and the insights and the kind of excitement to know that there are big, really big questions, but there are some answers coming through. And that was me. Yeah, if you just take my.
Hi there. So I was sharing the transport and energy session, and yeah, I think as Malcolm said, it's quite a range of things we discussed, from personal mobility to freight, shipping, green ammonia and shipping, etc. So the DFT opened the session with the sort of plan, the intermediate plans for the next 10 years, which I think was quite important, because we always talk about 2050, but it's very important to do 2030. And this sort of really the next steps of have a near-term investment strategy in place. Debbie Hopkins talked about forced car ownership and the double energy vulnerability that links to the other sessions here, and they're quite key. So essentially saying that this transition to zero carbon transport is not done for everyone at the moment. Kate talked a lot about EV uptake. And we sort of looking in our own research at different segments of sort of EV uptake that will dominate personal car mobility. Hannah talked about a more sort of inclusive EV adoption and different segments there, and the importance of security and certainty for not just personal consumption, but also business here. Luke Marion from the Oxford Bus Company talked about zero carbon buses and really the financial support coming out of the pandemic, and that's very important to ensure the transition to zero emission local public transport, and that there's really a lot more investment needed locally. And Bill finally, after some technical problems, talked very much about that green ammonia is much better than hydrogen. But one topic there was sort of the cathedral of engines in big cargo ships, and that's quite fascinating just to think you're at a completely different scale when we talk about global freight and shipping there. The personal highlight, I suppose, yes, transport can be decarbonized by 2050. 2030 is a lot more difficult. We have to talk about car reduction targets, car traffic reduction targets, really. But really, we need to make this an inclusive endeavor, not exclusive as it is at the moment.
Right. I was an observer for 2 sessions. The first one was the one Charlie and Tina moderated on buildings, and the second one was on infrastructure and digitalization. And in a way, it was sort of moving between these two ideas. One, what seems to be a very old idea around the built environment and how we need to shift the built environment. And the second one, much more sort of, futuristic and thinking about digitalization. But on buildings, one of the key questions that came out at the end of the discussion, which I think captured a lot of what we struggle with, is that given that, we know that buildings have multiple benefits, it's energy, it's health, it's, climate benefits, it's still so hard to move that sector. And this is something that we've been struggling for decades. And so just the complexity and the interactions between all these different sets of actors that need to happen on time, and the sort of interface with questions of cost, questions of quality, and just how sort of, in a way while we've made progress, we're still quite sort of stuck in terms of moving the built environment. And that stood out for me. It was the second talk, which was Marina's talk on quality versus quantity, particularly of retrofits, that I thought was really interesting. Because in a way, you really have to get the retrofit quality right. Otherwise, you're going to end up doing so much damage. And possibly an ignored issue often, or an issue we don't recognize enough. So especially in terms of the quality of the people who will then, and the skills of the people who are coming to do the retrofits, and applying that then, to this idea of heat pumps, because you can actually install a heat pump quite badly and end up with results that are not so useful. So I thought that was a really important point. Then the second session, which was sort of, thinking to the future, talking about infrastructure and digitalization, Jesus made a really, really interesting point about insulation being important, but not thinking of insulation in isolation, but rather thinking of insulation and its relationship with ventilation, and how important that is in the context of regions that are warming, but also places in the UK, because otherwise you end up in a situation where you have an airtight building that gets really hot in the summer. So actually, we need to think of the interaction between insulation and ventilation to be able to adapt for different types of climate extremes. And then finally, Charlie's point on digitalization, which again struck me, was how important control is in terms of whether digitalization gets domesticated in homes. So whether we use smart meters, that rests and turns in so many ways on how we're able to control the use of those smart meters, whether that is a perception of control, actual control, relational control. So I think, those were my highlights.
From your highlight to you, Charlie.
Yes, so I just wanted to mention two broad kind of themes which have been bubbling along in my head throughout the day, rather than specific talks. So one is on this enormous and unexploited potential to really transform demand in a way which reduces energy use and resultant emissions while improving quality of life, with all of these co-benefits which we've heard about through different talks, as well as it downside, you reduce energy demands, you downsize the decarbonisation challenge, that becomes easier and cheaper, and you improve resilience as well. And yet it lacks this policy salience, seemingly under normal conditions. And why is that? And then the second theme is the exact opposite of that, which is, in these very extraordinary times in which we are in this geopolitical shock, which has suddenly raised the salience of how we use energy and where our energy comes from, that how can we think about designing energy and also climate policy and systems that are resilient to those kinds of shocks? And I think for me, this involves moving away from a cost framing of mitigation and net zero to an opportunity and risk framing of net zero.
Okay, so I was co-chairing the same session with Charlie, and Radhika's given us a very good sort of person by person set of highlights. So everybody in that session, apart from Jesus, was in the same research team as I am. So first of all, I reflected on how lucky I am to work with all these people doing all this interesting stuff. So that was great. And that's the wider network here as well, actually. It has been a really positive experience being here today, having lots of interesting conversations with people. And the second thing is just to pick up something from Jesus's talk, was about, he was talking primarily about cooling and lots of different strategies to reduce demand for sort of powered cooling and reduce overheating and risk to people. And thinking about how a lot of our research focuses, of course, on heating energy use, thinking about the UK, but we need to start thinking about cooling more and linking adaptation and mitigation and looking at future climate. So this was a prompt to me to think about broadening our research outlook.
Okay, I was chairing the renewable generation session, and I thought there were two striking things. One was that two of the talks focused on what could be done in Oxfordshire. So there was a discussion of the LEO project and Integrate and bioenergy and land use. And I think what struck me is actually there's a lot of opportunity to actually transition quite quickly around Oxfordshire. But I guess the question that remains with me is how do you incentivize that to occur in a reasonable timescale? Because actually we want to move forward quickly, not by 2050 or not by 2040, but more quickly than that. So how do you actually move this discussion forward at a local level? And maybe that does involve things that are slightly outside of the control of local actors. For example, the utilities infrastructure. If you move to a more electrified system, you need better distribution of electricity, even if you do have local generation. So there were a couple of interesting talks. The other talks were more at a sort of bigger level. So I talked about offshore wind, where I think the technology is very mature. You can generate a lot of electricity, but the question is about distribution and storage. Again, Henry Snaith talked about PV, and again, the technology has really progressed over the last 10 years. It's economic. It's about scale. It's about really getting it out there. And then there was a discussion about tidal energy, where perhaps a bit more reliably predictable, but the technology a little less immature. And how do you actually fast track that technology into deployment? But that's a bigger problem. And then the final discussion was around economic models, and actually they need to be better to allow us to properly take this discussion forward. And there are a number of sort of limitations to current models that need to be sort of addressed.
Well, thank you very much. That was the entire day summed up for you here. Well done. I'll, in a sinister way, be behind you because we've run out of space here. And in fact, yeah, I'd love to echo Tina's point. This beats being in my bedroom. Lovely to be around you all, have the opportunity to talk and chat, and that's exactly what we have now. So, this is your chance to sort of chip in, comment on what you've heard, comment on the highlights. That'll become very meta when we do highlights of highlights. But I challenge you to tell me any other university in the UK where you could have a program like this that covers the whole breadth. Malcolm talked about the TARDIS of, we've covered the very local, we've covered the global, the small, the timescales from, Chris covered decades, and we talk about changes over minutes. It's all coming together here, and that is exciting, but it's also slightly daunting that we try to put all this together into future energy systems. So here's your chance. What are your thoughts? What were the highlights that you discussed? Did they map onto what you've just heard here? Are there things that you've missed? Are there things that worked well? Did the breakout sessions work for you? I mean, that's something that I think worked better than ever before. In the past, we sort of shied away from breakout sessions because you get imbalances. It seemed to work today quite well. David.
With breakouts, actually, I think the breakouts were absolutely excellent. Or the breakout that I went to was excellent, and unfortunately, I couldn't clone myself 3 extra to be in all of them.
That's what this session is for.
So I think listening to the different highlights from the session chairs, though, it strikes me that there's a couple of meta things actually about how over the top of how in the near term all of the things that we talk about are going to have to change, both in terms of the progression towards a net zero target, but also in response to outside influences. So, for example, this summer, when we talk about offshore wind, we had the least windy year since the 1960s. So we have to think about how that's going to, in future climate, that's going to become much more normal. So we have to think about low wind scenarios from our generation point of view. Radhika mentioned earlier, of course, the project that we're on with Malcolm around cooling degree days and heating degree days, even if we're successful in maintaining the Paris limitations. There's a lot of meta work to be done about that transition, and that's one of the great strengths that we've got with everyone here. So I think long may it continue, but how do we actually foment this in the network, and how do we bring the network and strengthen the network activities above and beyond where we are? I think I'd like to take away from this day.
Sounds to me like we might need a new institute, but we might come back to that. Any other thoughts?
Let me pick up on David on the meta.
Tell us your name.
I'm from Japan, actually. I'm picking up on his comment on meta works. I thought the one of the sessions in the morning of sensitive interconnection points.
The tipping points that.
Yeah. Because if you think of actions, if you think of all the meta actions you have to take, it's enormous. And I think if you can structure it in a way that if you take this and this and this, and then 80% of the problem will be, I'm sure it's not that easy. But you know what I mean? If you can structure it in a way that these are the points that you cannot miss, I thought that's magnificent. If I understood his presentation,
yeah.
Correct. So that was my highlight, probably.
Yeah, it's a really positive story, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, love tipping points. Feel free to comment if any of you feel you want to respond to the meta challenges that we're facing. Otherwise, still with you, Brenda.
I'm sorry, I wasn't here the whole day, but one of the things I heard was Nick Eyre saying that he'd never spoken to so many journalists in the last week ever before, and that Bayes had called him in. And if ever that was a demonstration of how much at the moment the external forces, the energy prices, the Ukraine conflict, the get out of gas, everything is actually bringing what we do to a very sharp political focus, and we mustn't miss it.
Yeah. If we think of Cameron's ball, that is a bit of a kick that we've got at the moment, and we now need to turn that into movement. Do you want to comment on that? Do you have thoughts? Charlie, you were talking about the sort of challenges that we're facing with getting policymakers. I mean, we heard this morning this point that lifestyle changes, policymakers just do not want to touch, and that's not a new thing. I know David Mackay many years ago with his calculator, he had a vegetarian diet was technically in the calculator, and DEC asked him to take it out because lifestyle just is not to be touched. And now suddenly it feels like we're getting close to being able to talk about things because our lifestyles have changed quite a bit in the last 2 years. So yeah, maybe there is movement to that particular situation. Charlie, do you want to comment?
I've got two comments that are sort of answers by analogy rather than direct answers. One is, Cameron also was talking this morning about green recovery spending post-COVID. And I've also done a bit of work in this area. And I think there was maybe a sense of hope or expectation that both the financial crisis in 2007-8 and then the more recent COVID shocks to the economy created this window of opportunity to really kind of look profoundly at the relationship between the economic system and its impact on energy and climate. And I'm generally an optimist by nature, but I think largely those two windows of opportunity were not exploited, despite the fact that there was the thinking already there. And the second answer by analogy is that in terms of geopolitical shocks to the energy system, the oil shocks in the late 1970s, also as a result of war, this time in the Middle East, caused both a very prominent salience of energy demand and emphasis on renewables into the early 80s, that sort of provided a lot of the bedrock of the learning, which we then sort of exploited much more in the 90s and 2000s. But it also stimulated innovation, activity, R&D, and so on in the oil and gas exploration and exploitation industries, which ultimately led to, in the longer term, things like fracking and so on. And so these windows of opportunities are also sort of double-edged swords in themselves. But I completely agree with the sentiment that it is a window of opportunity to try and do good things, particularly with respect to energy demand.
Chris.
Just a brief addition to that, I logged into the Financial Times at lunchtime, which, by the way, if you've got an Oxford email address, you can access for free. And there were two headlines. One was that Sunak has knocked £5 off fuel tax. And the other was Boris Johnson said he'd like more onshore wind. They changed the planning permission. So we see this exactly the thing, that the shock of what's happening with Russian gas and oil is going in both directions.
So bad, we now tolerate insurance.
Not to add to this. So it was 5p off fuel duty, right?
Yeah.
£5.
5p, that's what I meant to say.
Which, yeah, benefits the wealthy, and it's very regressive anyway. But I just wanted to add, what they should have done is actually something that the IEA just published a couple of days ago, the 10-point plan on sort of getting us off oil, basically. And I think 9 of the 10 points were about transport, like speed reduction, stuff that happened in the 1970s, like Charlie said, after the first oil shock. But this government chose completely different actions on transport, which is not great to see.
We're borderline political now, yes, but yeah. David.
So just following up on Christian's point, of course, but in many ways, we're quite an unusual country in our distribution. You know, we're a very distributed place. When you go into France and things like that, the population is actually very much more concentrated. So you could see why it might have happened. It may not be ideal, and we would hope it'd be short term, but you can see how and why it's happened, because it's transport and the requirement to transport to move is a very, very embedded thing into our society.
Very good. We've got more issues to cover, and I'm sure there will be another Energy Day next year to address them. I know that we have got a final agenda item with closing remarks from Nick and Malcolm. So unless you have any other burning comments or complaints or suggestions, which of course you can also discreetly pass to us by email or other ways, I would thank our panel for a really good overview of all the highlights we've encountered today. And yeah, thank you all, and over to Nick and Malcolm.
It's quite good.
So just a few closing remarks. One is to say thank you to everybody who came along today. It's been brilliant. I just want to pick up from the very first session is hopefully you're getting a glimpse into beyond blah, blah, blah. And hopefully we can see that there is something there. But the other phrase that stuck with me this morning is, you know, are we going absolutely batshit about trying to make a change? And the question is, we're probably not, but we are doing quite a lot. But in terms of today, I particularly want to thank Robin and Anne for putting this together. They've been, you know, absolutely fabulous in liaising with everybody, putting a fantastic program together. And I just want to say thank you to both Robin and to Anne. I know they've had a lot of challenges, and I think they've pulled off a fantastic day. So really well done. Nick, do you want to move on to the next piece?
Oh, at the end.
Magic happening. There we go. Hey.
Sorry, it's been a long time coming, but some of you know this already, but some of you don't. So let me tell you the story. We are today announcing the beginning of a new institute in the University of Oxford called the Zero Institute. Zero stands for Zero Carbon Energy Research. Oxford makes a nice acronym, provided you hyphenate zero and carbon, so you don't get a C in there, and it will do what it says on the tin. It will do research on zero carbon energy. To some audiences, I would need to explain why that's needed and why it's important. I really don't to this audience, so I'm not really going to. I'm going to just say a bit about what it is and what we hope to achieve. So it is a new interdepartmental research institute focusing on energy systems and funded by the university's strategic research fund. So central university money, which will support the institute for its first 5 years, after which it will be expected to become self-funding. But 3.2 million pounds of university money. So really grateful, particularly grateful to the PV Research Patrick Grant, whose idea having this fund was, and we will be working closely with another initiative that's been funded out of the same fund, which is the Oxford Net Zero initiative, which is sort of working on the land use side of net zero, whilst we'll be working on the energy side. The institute has also been, is being supported by the Department of Engineering, Materials Science and Geography and Environment. Those of you who understand university politics will know that means that cuts across 2 divisions and 3 departments. And if you need an explanation of why it's taking some time to come to fruition, that of course is it, but we are there now. We are funded from the 1st of January. The focus is on the systemic priorities for zero carbon energy. And again, I don't really need to explain that to this audience, except to say that one of the things we don't have to do, and it's absolutely clear after today, one of the things we don't have to do is encourage good research on energy issues in this university. That's not what the point is. The point is to fill some gaps and to help us move forward in looking at the overall picture. And this will form the initial research input to the proposed Energy Systems Accelerator, TESA development in Oseney. If any of you don't know about TESA, that means you haven't been talking to Malcolm enough recently. Please do in the drink session afterwards, and he'll explain to you that, which has an even bigger vision than zero. So these are the aims cribbed directly from the proposal that we're put in. So they are in proposal speak rather than the normal English. I always think a Centre for Thought Leadership on zero carbon energy systems sounds a bit pompous. I don't think it does after today. I think, as Phil said, that's the evidence that we can do that has been here today. What I think we do need to do is fill some gaps. Any university primarily organised along disciplinary lines is going to have some gaps. We've pointed to some of the interdisciplinary work that's already going on, but I think that's where a lot of the gaps are. The other thing we need to do is sell ourselves better. So there are people, bizarrely, in this world who think there is more research, good research on energy issues in some other universities than in Oxford. They are clearly wrong, but we need to persuade them of that. And having a central institute with a brand, with a mission to do that is part of what we want to do. So it's not about taking over the existing research that's based in departments. It's about building upon that and getting more bang for our buck overall. So the vision of the Institute is relatively straightforward. It's to provide the insights, tools and techniques to accelerate the transition to a just zero carbon energy system. Easy to say, hard to do, of course. And the mission of the Institute is really to develop the staff, resources and organisations to contribute to delivering that at a scale that's consistent with the expertise in the university that's been revealed here today. We have 4 underlying principles, and absolutely anybody in the university whose thinking is broadly aligned with these is happy to be involved and should consider themselves to be a part of the Institute in some way. And the 4 principles are: we are looking at a zero carbon energy system, an energy system without fossil fuels. If I'd stood here 10 years ago and said that, a lot of people would have thought that was ridiculous, but I don't think that's true anymore. I think we all know that we can do that. Achieving it requires systems thinking. Nothing else to say to this audience about that today. New technology will be critical. A lot of discussion about new technology today, not just the development of it, but of course the adoption of it. And I think there's going to be a bigger role in future for university researchers to be out there looking at things that are happening on the ground in the way that we've seen people talk about in LEO and ESO and other things today. But also a recognition that innovation is going to be required in business models, in policy, in society at large, and in our institutions. My sense is that there is now a broad consensus in energy researchers in this university around that sort of agenda. We may need to push it in some areas, but I think lots of people can sign up to that, and if they do, you're part of what we're trying to do. This is our organisation structure. I'm not going to go through it in any detail. The role of Institute Director will be advertised soon, and will be linked to a statutory professorship in engineering science. So it's a serious job in this university to lead this institute, and that I think sends a very clear message about its importance. Malcolm and I have been asked to fill in as acting co-directors whilst that happens, which we are, I know, both happy to do, but your help in doing that and getting stuff off the ground would be really appreciated. In due course, after the Institute Director is appointed, there will be appointments of 3 new programme leaders. Those programs are in, firstly, zero carbon space heating and cooling. Secondly, zero carbon energy conversion, by which we principally mean conversion of energy between electricity and hydrogen. And again, it's great to talk to an audience where I don't have to explain why that's important. And third, zero carbon energy use, and particularly the reduction of demand. If you don't understand why those are the 3 priorities, you haven't been here today. But it isn't to say there aren't other priorities. Those are the 3 that the SRF has agreed to fund. If there are other important areas that are of systemic research, we should be trying to set up programs in those as well. The diagram also shows that the network convener, so that the people who run the network that's organized today, in due course, we want to see as part of the institute. That's not to say there's anything wrong at the moment. Today shows us that there absolutely isn't, but it's important to get our coordination functions together in one place, we think. So we'll work on that over time. And in due course, we'll want to appoint an operations manager. We assume the Institute Director will wish to appoint an operations manager to lead the knowledge exchange and impact work of the Institute. So the programs initially will be each have 2 appointments. They'll be spread over materials, engineering, and geography and environment. As I said, other programs we will expect to be included in due course, and other departments. We didn't go beyond the 3 departments I mentioned at the beginning at this stage because, well, it was complicated enough to get 3 departments to work together to set this up. But others absolutely welcome to join in. And I know there are people from other departments here. We're happy to talk to you about how that might be done. So what are we going to do in the Institute? Malcolm.
Thanks, Nick. So remember that we said that part of our mission statement was to enable significant resource to be able to get this to scale. And by significant resource, we mean a substantial scaling up of the number of posts that get funded. And so and also to significantly scale up the activity and the impact that the broad energy research academics within the whole of Oxford, within the whole of the university can participate in. So we've developed 5 pillars where we're saying, can we start to build up relationships between internal academics, but also importantly with external organizations which we can start to interact with, so that we can provide them with insights to help them accelerate their transitions, but also to be able to get resource to enable us to provide the human resource behind that activity, which enables us to get those insights. So the first level of activity is to have some websites, and we'll show you that we started with the U0 website. The idea behind this one is to basically advertise the strengths and what we have and the research that we have within the university across the whole of the energy research capability, so that we can kind of show the world that we're actually got some quite fantastic stuff going on. And so the first thing that you might want to say is, how can we get something onto those websites? And the short answer is contact myself or Eleanor, and we can start to put your activities onto that, so that we can start to publicize to the world the wide range of activities that we've got going on. We found that in the Integrate program that we had the newsletters, which were actually extremely popular. We want to be building up the same thing. So again, that's a push activity so that people can see what we're going through. And of course, in this world, we can't do without social media. So we're going to have a much more strategic social media presence to be able to basically demonstrate the activity we've got here. As they start to attract people, what we want to be doing is being a bit more strategic in the seminar series that we've been running. We want to have one flavor which has got a strong academic focus, and that's to draw not only the academics within the university, but also to play with academics both nationally and internationally. And we found that having some seminars around that space is extremely useful. The second one is that a lot of you have come to the Oxford Energy Network seminar series. We want to change that slightly, and that is to say, we want to more proactively engage. We want to proactively engage external players. So the idea between those ones is that we will be running those seminars jointly with an internal and an external speaker on the same topic to make it a bit more interesting. And we will identify and pull in external people in that space. And we'll look at the internal people within the energy network who might be interested in that particular topic, invite them over. And the idea is to then be able to start to set up conversations between internals and external people. That will also probably include dinners afterwards. I remember when Chris used to run this, that was very successful, is to actually then have dinners afterwards, which we can then start to dive in a little more deeply and to start to build up those relationships. Alongside that, a number of groups have had some webinars that have been really successful, and so we want to extend on that. And then the third one down, the fourth one down, the special interest groups, is basically to say, can we pull together people that are working in particular areas? You know, there's some strong work in marine renewables, but I think, you know, that's basically in engineering. I'm sure there are people around the space that could actually get involved within those special interest groups. The next level is to look at skills development, and so this is building up on the various MEC courses that we have around the place. And if you look at the amount of lecturers and projects that are just to the work that David's done on the MSc in energy systems, we've had over 70 external people involved in that activities. That kind of shows that actually we are getting some really good traction with external people. We're also been looking to raise default sponsorships and to possibly align that along the MSc activities, so that you can go through a MSc to start off as a kind of a primary year, and then you can get a sponsored default studentship along that. I, together with the development office, have got about 6 default sponsorships in the last 2 months, and there are a lot more coming through. Again, if there's something that you might think, actually, I could do with some default sponsorships, please contact me, and we will work with you to identify particular philanthropy and actually help you get default sponsorships. The next level we want to look at is to start looking at exec education so that we can start to train some of the senior people around the place. Again, this university has a strong exec education, but in the energy space, we're not as strong as we could be. So we want to strengthen that. And we want to, we mentioned skills are really important. So we want to build up on our recruitment activities to enable our students to go out to make some significant impact. The fourth pillar is looking at problem solving, where we're looking to, now you can see we're starting to get greater engagement with externals. We started with bespoke workshops and sprints, work with those, say, for instance, such as Leo and other activities where we can help get joint funding. One of the things we're working with the finance team to actually smooth the contracting around getting bespoke workshops and sprints, because one of the big challenges we find is that you get you want a 2-hour engagement activity which you want to get paid for, and 6 months later the paperwork actually comes through. So we're looking to really smooth that process to allow people to do short, sharp pieces of engagement with them. And then there's longer term paid for research projects and consultancy. And then the last pillar we want to look at is to say, how do we actually get some real world impact? And so that's basically building up on our track record in developing innovation projects where we really doing a lot of stuff in the real world and learning by doing and getting some really exciting research alongside actual transition from innovation to business as usual. We want to look and build up on the policy influence that Geography and Tina and the like are doing, to say, how do we increase that? You probably noticed there's been about 5 or 6 spin-outs in the energy space, and how do we accelerate that activity? How do we look at corporate engagement so that we can actually pull corporates in a much bigger way? And also, how do we have a much better strategic engagement with philanthropy? So that what you can see is, as we get, you might see the shading changes, and basically what we're trying to do, the set of activities, is build up trust between academics and externals. And as we're building up trust, so that we can start to get that exchange of value from us to them in terms of our insights and our capabilities, but also to build up the trust so that we can get more resources to actually enable us to be able to have a stronger resource and research base. The next steps are to look at the getting an advert out for the director. I think Nick's already mentioned that. And then we want to start actually getting some strategic work actually getting going. The idea is that we'll start the seminar series fairly soon. The web page is up. So if you go look on your phones now or on your computers, you can see www.zero.ox.ac.uk. That's going live today. We want to get some quick wins with running some sprints with various organizations. If you have any ideas on sprints that you want to run with us, within Minitessa, that's a space within in Osney estate. We have a dedicated space about the size where we can run, where people can book and run sprints, and I'm more than happy to help you run those with internals or externals. So I think to conclude is that we're quite excited about actually looking at providing some strategic activity to really grow the impact and the capability within the energy space. And the Zero is meant to draw in, as Nick was saying, is that for all those who want to participate with it, all those academics who want to participate with us, all the externals that want to participate with us, this is an open invitation for you to come speak to us and to see how we can actually help you and how we can work with you to develop your particular field. Thank you very much.
I think if anybody's got any questions, the drinks reception would be an excellent place. Chris?
There are a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is
a bit short, yeah.
Builds on a lot of things we've been thinking about.
Yeah.
I remember a discussion already 10 years ago, but we've just seen some of these things. I understand there's 3 programs next, so you're allowing me in the room. You said we shouldn't be here if we didn't understand that. But I wonder if there's something missing. It's always seemed to me one thing we don't have in Oxford, although I don't know who has it, is people modeling the whole system, modelers. And I mean, if you think about it, there are people doing this on a global scale like Bell, like Shell and BP and the IEA and so on. The EIA in the US. In the UK, it's done by BEIS, it's done by the Committee on Climate Change. But somehow, the whole system modeling so pulls it together. Trouble is, it's got to be bloody good. And I don't know if there are people out there we can hire in this, but it's not sitting in your boxes.
I just happen to have in my direct vision two modelers. So do any of the modelers in the room want to say anything?
Charlie?
I would, so declaration, I work a lot with global systems modelers, but I'm not a modeler myself, but I agree it's, if used well, a very important analytical resource that also has significant leverage and influence on policy, but if used well, and there are very good modeling approaches and tools, and
modeling is worse than useless.
Do you want to say anything?
Well, I think we do have plans to actually bring some of those tools to Oxford.
But where does it sit in your structure then? In a sort of directorate unit? Like
No, I mean, it might be another program. It might not be in this institute. So the whole point of the institute is to fill gaps and coordinate. And so that's one of the ongoing discussions. It's been a long running discussion about the role of modeling.
It probably, just to stick to that one, it probably even goes beyond energy modeling, because I actually hate zero because the carbon budget is with current emissions is going to run out in 10 or even less years. And then we actually will have to put a negative institute instead of
So
zero.
one of the problems with designing these programs is where do you put the boundaries? Because you want to do everything, but it doesn't work.
At this point, can I suggest that we move to drinks? Because I think this is something that we can carry on for a long time.
Happy to talk to you, David.
Thank you.